Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. So we recently did a review of episode 11 and it was a good review, but we glossed over like the end of that episode, which was obviously one of the most exciting parts of that episode. In your typical Star Wars TV show, the most exciting part of an episode is usually an epic showdown between crime lords or a battle between two powerful Force users. The fate of a planet or maybe an entire galaxy is usually at stake. And as we've all come to expect, in Andor, the climax of episode 11 was what I'd like to call a routine traffic stop. And in a way, the fate of the galaxy was at stake in this situation as well. But no, seriously, this isn't really a space battle. It's some state troopers pulling over the Star Wars equivalent of a Honda Civic that's actually a sleeper cranking out 500 horsepower for no actual reason. And yeah, this scene was awesome. The countermeasures that Luthen used to destroy the tractor beam dish, it was both practical and visually exciting. The laser beam things on the wings, on the other hand, well, that would make it probably into one of my old everything wrong videos. But hey, sometimes when you're a badass renegade, dogfights aren't just about survival, it's also about style and having a good time, or 360 sniper headshots or something like that. But anyway, the fact that Tony Gilroy chooses the Cantwell-Class Arrestor Cruiser for this scene shows us that despite him always claiming that he's not interested in Star Wars lore, he really seems to have a deep understanding of the Star Wars galaxy and the challenges that the Empire faces at this point in history in 5BBY. The Cantwell-Class Arrestor Cruiser is the perfect ship for the Empire during this time period. In a way, Tony Gilroy kind of reminds me a lot of Timothy Zahn, who's the writer most famously known for creating Thrawn and the Thrawn trilogy. And it's not that their writing is similar or anything like that, it's just that they both like to focus more on the realistic aspects of Star Wars lore in the galaxy. They try to really figure out how things work, which of course on this channel we love, right? Now Timothy Zahn created logic-based villains like Thrawn, whose only superpower was really his ability to analyze things. In Andor, we have Dedge Ramiro in the ISB, which features as the main enemy that is supposed to hunt down the early rebellion. Because unlike the military, the ISB is flexible and can play the same games that Luthen Rael and his network can. And then there's the focus that Tony Gilroy places on the Imperial Army on Aldhani. Sure, they're a less exciting and less cool organization than the Stormtrooper Corps, but the Imperial Army was crucial to the Galactic Empire's stability and overall plan. I mean, it's so important that we did an entire video about it, and the fact that Tony Gilroy chose the less flashier organization means that he's actually more interested in that world building than just wowing the audience. It's the long-term investment in the story that he's after. And now when we transition finally to space battles in Andor, Tony Gilroy avoids the cliche of bringing in Star Destroyers and X-Wings. Instead, we have something like the Cantwell-Class Arrestor Cruiser, which, you know, despite having a lot of lore surrounding it and interesting history around it, this is an ugly looking ship. It's not flashy. It's really not that cool to most people. I know some people are geeking out about it. I am kind of. But this is actually a very functional kind of design. Function over form. And it's actually very similar to something that Timothy Zahn always used in his novels, which were the interdictor ships. Before we continue though, a quick word from our sponsor for today's video, naval.com. They got some amazing deals for you for Black Friday, and they end on November 30th. If you guys buy 2 of any of their lightsabers, you'll get $100 off automatically at checkout. And if you buy 3, you'll get $150 off of your entire purchase. For those of you who want to just purchase one of these lightsabers, you can use our promo code PORG, that's P-O-R-G, all caps, for 20% off. naval.com has an awesome range of different lightsabers, including dueling sabers that are great for sparring and heavy use. You can really smash them quite hard. And then you also have more premium and unique saber hilts, which have designs that are packed with all sorts of cool functions and sound effects. And all of them are beautiful to look at and feel like the real thing when you're holding them. So what I have for you guys here today is the first stun. It is a replica of the first and second lightsaber used by Obi-Wan Kenobi when he defeated Maul. And, you know, like, just holding this thing, it really gets me into Obi-Wan Kenobi's mindset. You were the chosen one! You were supposed to bring the nachos, not eat them! So if you guys are interested in this offer, check out the description down below. It's sponsors like naval.com that allow us to stay independent from the YouTube algorithm, which is forcing us to do shorter and shorter videos, which of course we don't want to do. Introduced just a few years after the rise of the Galactic Empire, the Cantwell-Class Arrestor Cruiser was created at the behest of the Department of Imperial Justice, who were basically the successors of the Judicial Department. They were essentially the federal law enforcement wing of the Republic. The Galactic Empire can be broken into many different eras, but generally things were sliding towards authoritarianism and more central control. We would see the Empire slowly eat away at individual rights, the ability for an individual to have financial success. They would also try to take power from local governments and local authorities and replace it with their own governors and central authority. At each major battle or incident, whether it's the Aldhani raid or the Alderaan mining accident / Yavin 4 incident, the Mid-Rim offensive, Hoth, or the Empire would move the chains a bit more forward towards their end goal, which is complete dominance. And more normal civilians as a result would become rebels, more Imperial soldiers and pilots would defect in protest. The Imperial Army would be replaced with the fanatic stormtroopers. The ISB would take over surveillance from local authorities and the Department of Imperial Justice. As the Empire got crazier and harder to follow, because at one point they were just blowing up planets for no reason, we would also see the reduced importance of apolitical institutions and the rise of more political institutions that really were just loyal to Emperor Palpatine and not to the citizens of the Empire. Take the ISB, for example. It was one of the many intelligence gathering agencies in the Empire, but it was solely loyal to Copnor or Palpatine's political movement. This explains why the ISB would be heavily involved in Operation Cinder, which basically just targeted and destroyed Imperial worlds full of innocent civilians. It was kind of Emperor Palpatine's last laugh. A national intelligence agency, in theory, should fight against things like Operation Cinder. It would categorize ISB as a bunch of fanatics who've gone rogue and are, carrying out terrorist attacks, basically. And this is exactly what happens every time the Sith are in power, and Luthen Rael really understood this.
We need the fear. We need them to overreact.
You can't be serious.
The time has come to force their hand.
It's the classic fallacy of Sith governance. They're great at taking power and manipulating people, but they're just too batshit crazy and emotional to be capable of running anything. The Sith don't care about public opinion. They don't care about any opinion that isn't theirs. Even the most brutal dictators in the world have to yield and respect public opinion to a certain extent, and Palpatine actually did that as well for a certain period of time. But then the first Death Star was destroyed and all bets were off. And in his madness, Emperor Palpatine would build tens of thousands of resource-intensive Imperial-class Star Destroyers instead of the Cantwell-Class Arrestor Cruiser. And yes, we're going to be comparing these two ships because it really symbolizes the two main ideologies of how to run an empire at this time period. The Galactic Empire spanned the entire known galaxy. I mean, the struggle that every leader from the Old Republic period to the Old Sith Empire faced was figuring out how to control that entire galaxy. The Republic usually relied on a small centralized fleet that could serve as a quick reaction force, and then subsidize local planetary defense forces that were supposed to hold the line until reinforcements from the federal military could arrive. I think it's actually one of the better ways to tackle the issue of galactic security. It's not perfect, but people who look for utopia usually end up killing a lot of people for some reason. The Empire, on the other hand, was kind of stupid. It wanted to take everything under its control. I mean, why kick out the Preox Morlana corporate authority? Yes, Cyril Karn and Sergeant Tactical Blueberry screwed this one up, but they were clearly doing things in a very similar way to how the Empire would do it, and they were doing it for a fraction of the price. I mean, locals understand local problems, and they're usually locally funded. But no, Emperor Palpatine wanted everything. Control of the banks, control of natural resources, the military-industrial complex, and everything else in between. And so his military strategy was all about maximum coverage, or at least it was at one point in time. And then Governor Tarkin passed his very Sith-like doctrine on to Palpatine, which essentially came to the conclusion that the Empire would never have enough ships to actually control the entire galaxy. And that brutal use of force and the fear of that force, well, that was what they were going to try to control the galaxy with. Of course, that doesn't work at all. And the Imperial-class Star Destroyer, well, that was the main part of that equation. This 1.6 kilometer long ship was hailed as one of the most resource-intensive vessels in the entire Imperial Navy. As you guys all know, logistics is what wins wars, and after the Battle of Endor, when Emperor Palpatine died and basically the logistical structure of the Empire started falling apart, the Imperial-class Star Destroyer was operating at half capacity almost all across the galaxy. These things are very hard to keep running. The idea behind the ISD was to build a self-contained strike force that could be shipped to any corner of the galaxy. An ISD can hold an entire Stormtrooper Legion on board. That's around 10,000 troopers. It also can hold, whatever vehicles they need for the ground offensive. We're talking about tanks, walkers, transports, armor, fire support, whatever. There's also building material on the Star Destroyer for an entire prefabricated base that can be deployed to the ground. The ISD also carried a mixed wing of starfighters and bombers. They also had different type of transport ships to get everything down to the surface. And of course, they could provide fire support from orbit with its massive turbo laser banks. The Imperial-class Star Destroyer had on board a powerful suite of comms and sensors, and so an entire military campaign could be coordinated from inside the safety of the ship in orbit. But why? I mean, why do you need thousands of these ships when your enemy is bringing at most, what?
30 men. Plus Krieger.
The Imperial-class Star Destroyer was complete overkill against a bunch of rebels using snub fighters and converted civilian freighters. Now, the galaxy was organized into many different sectors. Generally, a sector had around 50 inhabited planets or moons. Each one of these areas would have its own sector fleet, which were usually centered around a group of Imperial-class Star Destroyers. There could be anywhere from 4 to over a dozen of these large battleships. But these Star Destroyers, as impressive as they were, could only control one system at a time. These ships were designed for short-range engagements, and even their starfighter escorts were short-range and couldn't really operate independently from the ISD. And so when you have rebel attacks like the raid on Aldhani, the Empire doesn't have enough time to react to the criminals, and so they're able to escape. Which means that Andor and his team only had to evade whatever Imperials were on the ground. At 150,000 credits each, you essentially have a few Star Destroyers that are too large and too slow to react to a nimble rebel hit-and-run attack, and so they can't really cover their entire sector. And then let's take a look at the Cantwell-Class Arrestor Cruiser, which costs only 2.2 million credits. I mean, you could easily have one of these cruisers for each of the inhabited planets in a sector and still have enough credits left over to buy a couple Archidans-class light cruisers if the Cantwell really runs into heavy opposition or, I don't know, pirate fleets. And that's all for the cost of one single Imperial-class Star Destroyer, not 6 or however many you have in a sector fleet. The Cantwell was by far a much smarter and valuable kind of thing to purchase for your Navy. And the Cantwell isn't as useless as it looks in Andor, by the way. I mean, the Fondor is clearly not a normal haulcraft. This thing has some very interesting modifications that makes it very formidable. The Cantwell was designed to disable enemy ships. On board, you could find 3 twin heavy ion cannons, which are designed to disable enemy electronics and the reactor. The ship could also carry up to 24 starfighters, including 1 tie boarding craft that allows for an inspection team to go on board of an enemy ship. These kind of vessels look like tie bombers. The RT-17 repulsor tractor beam emitter, which the Arrestor class is built around, was a long-range tractor beam, far more effective at stopping fast-moving prey than the ISD's own Q7 tractor beams. And this is really the key to the Cantwell's design and why I think it makes the perfect patrol craft. I mean, think about it. How often did one single rebel ship escape from multiple ISDs and go on to cause massive amounts of damage against the Empire? Yes, the Fondor was able to use its special countermeasures to destroy the tractor beam, but my understanding is Captain Elk, like your typical Imperial officer during this time period, did not take the threat of Luthen's tiny haulcraft seriously enough and did not have his navigational shields or any shields up. So the basic procedure, as we mentioned before, is to basically grab onto hold of a ship with the tractor beam and then use the ion cannons to take out all of their engines and weapon emplacements. But of course, these are the lower level tactical decisions that will be continuously tweaked as criminals and the Empire will continue to try and outfox each other. But from a strategic level, and this is what's really important here, the Empire needed smaller, more efficient law enforcement vehicles, like the Cantwell. They didn't need war vessels. In 13 BBY, when young Solo was still in the Imperial Academy training program to be a pilot, he was based off of one of these Cantwell-class Arrestors, and it seems like these type of ships were quite common in the galaxy, at least until the Battle of Yavin 4 escalated the entire conflict into a real shooting war. It's unfortunate that we don't see more of the Cantwell. I know it's an awkward-looking ship, but again, I rather prefer function over form in some cases, and I think with the Empire, that's been long overdue. The Cantwell, like the interdiction ships used like Thrawn, were really the only tools capable of destroying large groups of rebels by trapping them and preventing them from escaping a battle, just like what Admiral Thrawn did during the Battle of Autolon. So there you have it, guys. That is my assessment of the Cantwell-Class Arrestor Cruiser. I believe this would have been a much safer and better option for investment when it comes to designing your naval fleet. The Imperial-class Star Destroyer was simply not necessary. I mean, you could have a few based on Coruscant, and you could rush them over whenever like a larger conflict breaks out, and you do need that kind of firepower, like perhaps on Mimban, where you need the orbital support. But for most of the early Rebellion period, this large vessel was completely unnecessary. So guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy,